If the world was overrun with flesh-eating monsters and you're one of the last remaining humans left, what would you do? I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the fungal zombies in The Girl with All the Gifts. Melanie here is going to kill everyone on Earth. She's secretly looking at pictures of the outside world when suddenly the lights turn on and she hears guards in the hallway commanding her to get ready. Following orders, the girl puts on her clothes and sits down in the wheelchair just before soldiers come in with rifles pointed straight at her head. Melanie greets them with a smile, but these guards are terrified of the girl and don't answer. One of the soldiers straps her to the wheelchair and he pushes her out into the hallway, revealing a massive underground bunker. She's taken through a corridor along with several other kids and escorted into a large room where rows of children have been parked, all of them restrained to their wheelchairs. These kids are prisoners under constant surveillance, but there's something very mysterious about them. As the soldiers clear the room, their teacher, Miss Justino, walks in and greets them, ready to begin their morning lessons. That's when Melanie here asks to be read a story, and the teacher agrees, inviting the students to write their own stories. With their hands unlocked, the children get to work, and the teacher asks for one of the kids to read what they wrote. Melanie raises her hand to volunteer and starts to tell her story, but as she reads, the teacher begins crying. It's the saddest thing she's ever heard, and the woman walks up to the girl, reaching out to touch her, but that's when the door swings open. Startled, the teacher backs away as Sergeant Park storms into the room, scolding the woman for getting too close. He decides to teach her a lesson and spits on his arm, holding it out for this boy to smell. Suddenly, the student goes feral, overwhelmed by the scent of human flesh, and it starts a chain reaction as the other kids behind him try to break out of their restraints. It's a horrifying reminder that these children are not as they appear, and the soldier ends his demonstration, rubbing this special gel over his arm. Okay, this is the worst idea in the world. This military base is educating dozens of children that are so dangerous they have to be strapped to wheelchairs and it's not safe. But it reveals one horrible truth. Even in a zombie apocalypse, adults would still force us to go to school. Now, the soldiers are terrified of the kids, so if the situation gets out of control, they wouldn't think twice about killing every child on the compound. It's clear that we have to escape, but since we're restrained for 16 hours a day, that's going to be very difficult to do unless we start thinking outside the box. Now, in a situation like this, we shouldn't be focused on things we can't control. Instead, we have to identify the things that we can control and use them to our advantage. For starters, it's important to realize that a military base doesn't spend any time and resources educating children unless they need something out of it. This is good news, because once we've identified what they need from us, then we might be able to leverage it to find a way out. Now, it's very likely that their education is being used as a screening process to select the best candidates for an experiment, so that's exactly what we need to use against them. If it were me, instead of being smart and answering their questions correctly, I would be extremely careful to balance this by intentionally giving them wrong answers as well. This way, we can avoid selection by never being in the top or the bottom percentile of the class. We are neither too stupid to dispose of or too smart to be selected for experimentation. In the meantime, the best thing we can do is inspect our wheelchair. This is the only thing that's keeping us locked down during the day, and it's sitting right here in our prison cell. If it were me, I would be spending every night trying to gradually loosen all the screws holding the chair together so that when the time is right, I might be able to break out of it. I would also try to steal this pencil because we can take out the eraser and flatten the metal holder here to use it as a makeshift screwdriver. If things get desperate, we could even use the pencil to stab someone in the neck if they get close enough. As crazy as it sounds, this technique was actually used by OSS agents during World War II, who were trained to use everyday objects as weapons, and it might help us escape. The teacher visits Melanie and sees that she's been left strapped into her wheelchair. With no one around to help, the woman walks into the cell and unlocks the restraints. But this was her biggest mistake. The girl can smell her flesh and is quickly losing control. She screams at the teacher to leave the room, and the woman backs off just as the girl jumps out of the wheelchair. Terrified, Miss Justino rushes outside and locks the door before breaking down into tears. There's nothing she can do to help the girl, and starts covering her skin in blocker gel to hide the scent. The next morning, she's woken up by a blaring alarm and prepares her wheelchair, but today something is different. The sergeant comes into the cell and personally restrains her before wheeling her out of the room. But instead of taking her to class, he takes her into an elevator. It's the first time she's been anywhere else, and finally gets to see the world above with her own eyes. Exiting a hangar, the girl watches as soldiers defend the military base from a horde of zombies, and the only thing protecting them is a giant chain link fence. The compound is hours away from being overrun, and the sergeant quickly brings her inside a research lab to meet the doctor. Looking around, Melanie spots a brain inside of this jar, and she quickly realizes that she's not getting out of here alive. The soldier locks the wheelchair in place and leaves the room, as the nurse administers an anesthetic, and the girl quickly falls unconscious. Moving her to the operating table, they're going to cut her open for research, but before the surgery begins, she suddenly wakes up. That's when Miss Justino barges into the room and sees her favorite student on the table. Furious, she picks up a fire extinguisher, making it clear that she won't allow them to cut the girl open. The doctor points out that the prisoners only look like children, but are being controlled by a fungus in their brain. The teacher starts to calm down, but suddenly Dr. Caldwell reaches for a can of pepper spray and shoots it straight in the woman's eyes. Soldiers storm into the room and pick the woman back up onto her feet, as the doctor explains she needs to make a vaccine to save the world, but can only create it by harvesting Melanie's body. She orders the guards to take her away, and they drag her out of the room, leaving Caldwell here to start the operation, but it's too late. She stops in her tracks as an alarm blares across the military base, knowing that the infected have finally broken through. Okay, this is terrifying. These scientists are literally harvesting children's organs to find a cure for the zombie outbreak, and it's completely f***ed up, but I honestly can't blame them. In all fairness, if the entire world is overrun and these kids are humanity's last hope, then it's obviously the right thing to do. It's inhumane, but we have to remember that empathy and morality don't exist at all unless humanity actually survives, so there's not much of a choice. Having said that, these scientists are already making a huge mistake. The doctor here explained that these prisoners only look like children and are controlled by a brain fungus. But there's one problem with this theory. In order to control every aspect of a human's brain, the organism would have to be just as sophisticated as the brain itself. But fungi don't have the cellular structure for this to be possible. The most important detail here is that these kids are acting completely normal until they're exposed to the smell of human flesh. That means the only area of the brain that's being affected is the hypothalamus, which controls our appetite and digestive system, so it's impossible that the kids are being fully controlled by the fungus. What they should do is use existing medical research and take extracts of the fungus so that they can develop an antifungal medication to kill it. Instead, they're treating this girl like she's the fungus, and it's just bad science. Now, to give the doctors some credit, studies have shown that several types of fungi are actually capable of spatial recognition, memory, and adaptive learning. As an example, German mycologists measured the effect of temperature changes on the growth of mycelia, which are like the roots of a mushroom. They observed that when heated up quickly for a few hours, the mycelium stopped growing. But when the temperature was reduced, they grew back by forming smaller colonies in different spots to protect themselves. This suggests that they are intelligent enough to develop defense mechanisms from past memories, but it's just not enough to control an entire brain. Now, none of this actually matters to Melanie if she's about to be harvested for organs, but if she had been paying attention, the girl would have realized she had the perfect chance to escape. The night before, this teacher came to check on her and took an unnecessary risk to free the girl from her wheelchair. It was the humane thing to do, but kindness gets you killed in a zombie apocalypse. The woman didn't even think ahead to use her blocker gel as a precaution, and it was a very dumb decision. If I was Melanie here, I wouldn't have warned the teacher at all, because right now there are no soldiers in the hallway, the door is open, and the only thing standing between us and freedom is this one woman. The best thing to do is bite the teacher and run straight out the door. It's cold-blooded as hell, but if you'd rather die to protect someone who's helping enslave you, then you've already lost. The doctor insists they continue as planned, but she's going to instantly regret it. The lab assistant activates the security system, but as the shutters come down, a mutated human breaks through the glass window and bites her on the arm. Acting quickly, Dr. Caldwell smashes the creature's head in before stabbing the second one to death with a glass shard, but walks away, horrified to see a cut on her hand. That's when she notices her colleague has just transformed into a zombie and runs for shelter in the closet, leaving Melanie alone with the nurse. Taking her chance, she reaches for a scalpel and cuts through the restraints before escaping from the research lab, but quickly realizes that outside is even worse. The girl is shocked to see the entire base is overrun, but for some reason, none of the zombies are attacking her. As the girl looks around, she spots one of the guards hitting her teacher in the head and starts running to protect her. Furious, she jumps on one of the soldiers and bites deep into his throat. His friend tries to help, and Melanie attacks her too, killing them both. It's her first taste of human flesh, but the girl suddenly begins to feel exhausted as she slowly passes out. That's when the teacher wakes up and sees Melanie lying on the ground next to her. Stumbling over, she picks her up and starts running for safety, desperately searching for a rescue vehicle. Suddenly, an armored van shows up and they get inside seconds before the horde reaches them. The survivors drive out of the compound as fast as they can, leaving behind an army of unstoppable zombies. Inside the vehicle, the girl wakes up panicking as she tries to get her bearings, and that's when she notices Dr. Caldwell staring straight at her. The woman managed to escape, but the only thing she cares about is using this girl to make a cure. That's when the van comes to a stop, and the sergeant quickly turns around, aiming his gun at Melanie. The teacher refuses to let them kill her and opens the door for the girl to jump out of the vehicle. She starts running away, but realizes that she doesn't know anything about the outside world and has nowhere to go. Meanwhile, the soldiers radio for help, but no one is responding to their broadcast. Taking inventory of their supplies, the group discovers there's no water, only a few magazines of ammo, and a plastic face mask. They'll need to resupply if they want any chance of surviving, and the doctor insists they bring the girl with them. Melanie is the key to finding a cure, but they have no idea she'll destroy the entire human race. Okay, this entire situation could have been avoided. The camp was already close to being overrun, but it seems like all they did was wait for it to happen. A proper military base would be expected to have emergency protocols to either protect the compound or evacuate, and it seems like they had neither. With a fence as flimsy as this one, it's obviously not going to be enough to keep a horde of zombies out, and eventually they're going to break through when enough pressure builds up on it. With this in mind, the first thing I would have done was develop a strategy for this very predictable situation before it ever happens. The smartest thing to do is have the entire army dig a series of trenches between the two fences here so that we have enough time to get the job done safely. When the horde breaks through the first fence, they'd walk right into the trench and wouldn't be able to climb back out. This filters the herd, and we'd be able to kill them off without applying any more pressure to our last remaining barrier. If they're all stuck in a trench, the next thing to do is light them on fire. This army base has at least 8 jeeps and 2 trucks in the compound, so I'd be willing to use some of our gas supply to wipe out a zombie horde if it keeps us all alive for another day. Now, as effective as fire is, gasoline is far too valuable a resource to be using every time we're under attack. We need to develop more strategies to kill as many as we can while using as few resources as possible, and that's why I would turn this into an electric fence. To understand why this would be effective, we need to look at what makes these zombies tick. Without a beating heart, it's very likely that this fungus has hijacked the electrochemical charges for neural activity, which sends messages throughout the nervous system and allows the zombies to move. If we can interrupt these electrical impulses, then it might be enough to stop the fungus from interacting with its host and render the zombie completely useless. With this in mind, I would take several car batteries from a few of these extra trucks and hook them up to the fence. It's a very easy experiment to set up, and all we need is a battery, jumper cables, and a ground pole to make it work. If it has the potential to fry hundreds of zombie brains in a single touch, it's definitely worth a try. The survivors keep the girl restrained in the gunner seat and force her to wear a face mask, making sure she can't bite anyone. They stop the car in the woods and all the humans get out, heading towards a nearby lake to fill their canteens. But this guy is about to ruin everything. As the group holds out their bottles to collect water, this soldier gets startled and fires his rifle without a suppressor. The gunfire has attracted the attention of nearby zombies, and they need to get out of there immediately. Panicking, they all run back to the van as they fight off the infected, but one of them attacks the soldier from behind. He struggles to break out of its grip and fires his gun wildly, catching the sergeant's attention. He sees the man on the ground holding the creature back and tells him to push the zombie as high as he can before shooting it straight in the head. The survivors finally reach the car, but when the man tries to get in, the sergeant pulls out his gun. The man realizes there's a wound on his arm and insists it's not a bite, but the sergeant doesn't believe him. He holds the soldier at gunpoint until the man finally begins to turn and shoots him dead without a second thought. Inside the van, Melanie realizes the soldier was transformed, and the teacher explains to her that he became a zombie-like creature called a hungry. They've been infected with a fungal virus that spreads through bodily fluids, and Melanie here is one of them. Later, the group stops for a break while the sergeant checks under the hood, but the man has some bad news. A bullet hit the fuel line so the van won't start, so they have no choice but to walk to London. It's the only way they'll be able to call the military base for help, and they all agree to the plan. When they finally arrive at the city limits, the soldiers begin to survey the area and find that the infected are everywhere. The streets are flooded with them, but they're still standing motionless, waiting to be triggered. The sergeant approaches the others, telling them they'll have to go through the horde, and the doctor reassures them that the blocker gel will make them undetectable. They'll need to move quietly to stay safe, but things are about to go horribly wrong. Okay, this is not a good idea. Traveling in a group like this makes it virtually impossible to sneak through hundreds of zombies undetected. Eventually, someone is going to trip or make a sound and we'll all be trapped with nowhere to run. It's way too dangerous, and the smarter thing to do would be to send one person to scout for food and a radio signal. They don't need everyone together for this to happen, and the larger the group, the lower the chances are of staying alive. The teacher is too emotional, and the doctor is too important for the survival of mankind, so I would send either the soldier or the girl to look for supplies. One of the biggest problems is that they aren't using this girl to their strategic advantage. Right now they're treating her like she's a liability, but actually she's the best thing they could ask for. The girl is half zombie, so she wouldn't draw the attention of the infected because they recognize her as their own. This means she can easily wander the streets of London looking for useful resources without having to risk anyone else's lives. It's an obvious advantage, and if I was in the situation, it's the first thing I would try. Now, this wasn't their only mistake, because the girl could have been made useful much earlier if they were using their brains. When the group stopped for water, everyone got out of the truck, and it was an unnecessary risk. First of all, there's no clear line of sight and it's a dead end, so there's nowhere to run if they get cornered. Trucks are also extremely loud vehicles, which is guaranteed to attract attention, so I would have made everyone stay inside and send the girl out to collect water for us to minimize the risk. We also have to consider the best way to fight a zombie, because rifles like these are very effective for long-range use. But when you're stuck in close quarters, this is not going to be helpful. If our lives are under constant threat, then we should have a knife with us at all times, because we'll never know when we'll need to use it. It's the most basic tool for survival, and if this soldier had one, he probably would have survived the attack. The group makes their way through the horde, walking as carefully as they can, when the doctor notices something strange. One of the creatures is wheeling a baby carriage, and she gets closer to investigate. Blocking the wheels from moving, she lifts at the blanket and sees a live rat has devoured the body. It's horrifying, and she gasps in shock, alerting the mother, who starts attacking her. The sergeant quickly shoots the zombie in the head, but the sound alerts more of them. The group moves upstairs as the infected begin to wake up, and the soldiers pick them off one by one until they make it to an abandoned hospital, taking shelter inside. Looking around, the sergeant finds a rope leading upstairs, and they climb to the floor above. The group splits up to make sure it's safe, and leaves the girl with the doctor. Curious, Melanie asks the woman about her past and if she's human or not. The doctor tells her that she's something entirely different, and reveals that the sergeant found the children in the hospital. Their mothers had been infected, giving birth to a new generation of carriers who gained an immunity to the disease. The children were then taken to the military base and studied by the researchers, who discovered that all of them had the fungus covering their brains, and the doctor is determined to find a cure at any cost. The next morning, the group discovers a horde has gathered outside the building and there's no way to escape. But Melanie here has an idea, volunteering to go out alone to distract them. The doctor doesn't want to take that risk, but she knows the infected won't attack her, and the girl promises to come back unharmed. Exiting the building, she carefully walks through without alerting the zombies. With her first taste of freedom, she explores the city streets, but that's when she sees a stray cat run by. Her instincts suddenly take over and she runs after the animal, chasing it into the bushes. Ripping off her mask, she brutally eats it alive, enjoying her first meal of the day. Later, the girl searches a nearby house for supplies, but as she looks around, she hears barking in another room and finds a dog has been left behind. She decides to bring the animal back to the hospital, but as she's carrying it through the crowd, one of the creatures suddenly wakes up. Thinking quickly, the girl lets go of the dog and it runs away in terror as the infected chases after it, and the entire horde suddenly follows, clearing the hospital's entrance. Okay, as simple as it seems, this is actually a genius strategy. This girl knows more than anyone how a zombie thinks, so she had the perfect instincts to clear the horde. Using a dog might seem cruel, but it's going to easily outrun the infected because it's faster, it can crawl into tight spaces, and the horde isn't smart enough to corner it and catch their prey. Now, the doctor here should have been paying attention, because this strategy reveals a whole new branch of study that would be useful to our survival, and that is zombie dynamics. We often think about zombies as individual entities that react to stimuli on their own, but this might be the wrong model to understand their behavior. If this infection is being caused by a fungus, then it's possible that they operate with something very similar to a hive mind mentality. In many species of fungus, the spores are released and develop into mycelium, which can branch out in all directions. Some will then grow into rings with dozens of mushrooms, each taking on a life of its own. But what's fascinating is that they're all still connected to each other and can react as a single organism. This is what makes these zombies so scary, because there's actually some evidence that they can behave the same way and are connected to each other through this dynamic. Earlier, when the group was trying to sneak through the sleeping zombies, some of them seemed to be triggered by nothing at all. Everyone here was already wearing locker gel to hide their scent, and after moving up the stairs, they weren't making any noise. But for some reason, several zombies still became aware of their presence. As strange as it might seem, this is actually observable in the animal kingdom as well. Scientists have learned that ants use a variety of smell chemicals to communicate, and will leave a trail of pheromone messages as they walk. This allows other ants to follow them, discovering if another colony member has found food before they even reach their destination. Now, since these zombies' main trigger is scent, it's very possible that it's not just humans they can smell, but also a spectrum of other smell messages that communicate when food is nearby. It explains why there's suddenly a horde of them standing outside the building, even though the survivors never made a sound. Insights just like this one will give us more information about our enemies so that we can use it against them and stand a chance of surviving. With the area now safe, the survivors continue through the city when the doctor notices a tree growing out of the sidewalk. She reveals that these have been appearing all over the country and represents the virus's next stage of life. It makes the girl worried the same thing will happen to her, but Dr. Caldwell suggests that because she's a second generation infected, she has a symbiotic relationship with the fungus and needs it to survive. Later, they make it to the BT Tower, but find it's completely overgrown with vines stretching all the way to the top. The doctor explains that all the infected in the area have grouped together and combined into this massive tree. Seeing thousands of seeds growing on branches, she reveals that when they open, the fungus will spread and infect everyone on the planet. The human race would be completely destroyed, and there's nothing they can do but survive one day at a time. They continue walking when the group finds something that could save their lives. It's an armored truck with a high-tech trailer hitched to it. The doctor explains that these were made to act as mobile research labs, and since they're solar-powered, all its electronics should still work. Opening the door, the sergeant leads them inside and turns on the lights as the doctor checks the equipment. And to her relief, she has everything she needs to make a cure. As the others settle in, the sergeant heads to the driver's compartment and tries to start the truck, but the engine won't turn on. He thinks it can be fixed and returns to the main room to try contacting the nearby military base. There's no response on the other end, and to make matters worse, they still haven't found any food. Gallagher here volunteers to search for supplies, but as he leaves, Melanie starts to get nervous. The girl realizes she's starving and is overwhelmed by their smell. It's a clear sign she's about to lose control, and they have no choice but to let her outside, hoping she'll find something to eat. The girl searches the streets for food and notices birds flying off a nearby rooftop. It's her best chance of finding fresh meat, and the girl runs into the building to hunt for breakfast. She manages to catch one on the roof and devours it raw, but that's when she notices something strange. Melanie slowly walks inside and sees a group of children playing together. They're just like her. But suddenly, one of the kids runs up and starts sniffing the air. None of them can speak, but the girl realizes they smell the soldier out on patrol and are about to hunt him down for food. Okay, this is going to be a problem. There's a very good chance that there's no one left to rescue us, and we're completely on our own. So we have to look at this research lab like it's our new base camp for the next few weeks, while the doctor tries to make a cure. Now, none of this is going to matter if the spores from this overgrown fungus starts to germinate. This thing is the biggest existential threat to us because most spores are actually microscopic. They'll spread through the air to be inhaled by the only remaining humans on the planet, and that's not a risk we should be taking, which is why I would be looking for face masks. On average, spores have a size of roughly 3 pm, so a standard mask with a 2.5 pm filter should be enough to block them from being inhaled. If the group is near the BT Tower here, there's a store nearby called the UK Prepping Shop on Cleveland Mews, which sells gas masks as well as meals ready to eat. They obviously don't have Google to figure this out, but since this area doesn't have roaming zombies, it It should be easy for them to search the nearby stores and find the supplies they need to prevent contamination. This should hopefully protect us from spores and fix our food shortages, but the same is not true for Melanie here. As innocent as she looks, this girl is a threat as long as she's staying inside the lab with us, and eventually, she's going to run out of animals to eat. When there's nothing left, her zombie instincts will take over, and we need to fix this problem before she starts eating the others. Now, when Melanie was living on the military base, she was being fed worms, which is really smart. These creatures feed off of organic matter, helping it to decompose, and they get their nutrition from microorganisms that live in the soil. With the city overgrown in plant life, we're going to have a much easier time finding worms to eat instead of stray cats. The added benefit is that they're actually a superfood, because they're extremely high in proteins, iron, and amino acids, which help break down food and repair body tissue. Now, it's obviously not practical to go out digging for worms every time the girl gets hungry, so the smartest solution to this is vermiculture, or worm farming. It's actually pretty easy, and all we need is some kind of basin with soil and a weekly supply of compost for them to eat. Then, after a couple of months, we can harvest and let them reproduce all over again. It's going to take time, but if we start out with enough culture samples, we can produce 150 worms for every single worm we find in a year, which doesn't sound like much, but trust me, it's a lot. Considering this is what she was eating at the military base, they probably already know how to do this, and it's a good idea to continue trying, or they might end up as zombie food. Meanwhile, the doctor's wound has gotten worse, and when the teacher asks her what's wrong, the woman reveals she's dying. The cut on her hand has gone septic, and there's no way she'll survive. Desperate, the woman tells the teacher that she can make a cure, but needs to harvest Melanie's body, and this is her last chance to save humanity. Miss Justino refuses to sacrifice her student, and that's when they hear the girl knocking on the door. Inside, she warns the group that the soldier on the supply run is about to be hunted down by a gang of children. They're infected just like her, and the kids will eat him alive if they don't find him in time. Worried, he tries to radio Gallagher but gets no response. The soldier has crawled inside of a supermarket to get supplies and left his walkie-talkie behind. Suddenly, they hear a voice on the lab's radio calling from a military base, but there's bad news. The voice on the other end tells them they're about to be overrun just before the signal cuts out. In another part of the city, Gallagher here is searching a supermarket when he finds a rack of adult magazines. Enjoying the well-written articles, the man hears something behind him and is surprised to see a feral child. He tries to communicate with her, but she backs away and leads him through an aisle. He's suddenly ambushed as another child slices his legs, trapping him with no way to escape. The man pulls out a hand grenade and threatens to blow them all up, but all they see is dinner as the children rush forward and eat him alive. Melanie leads the group through the city and tracks the soldiers sent directly to the supermarket. Lifting up the shutters, they head inside and the group is horrified to discover that they've arrived too late. The soldier's body has already been ripped apart, and that's when the girl realizes they've just been lured into a trap. Going outside, she sees the infected children are waiting for them and have completely surrounded the entrance. There's no way to escape, but Melanie knows exactly how to handle this. The other children stand back as the girl growls at them and faces off against their leader. They start fighting desperately to survive when she suddenly rolls away from him and the kid realizes he's been handcuffed to a bike stand. There's no way he can protect himself, as Melanie takes the bat in her hands and brutally beats him to death. Okay, this girl is savage. She just pummeled this kid to protect her friends, and it was a very smart decision to make. These children are half zombies and half human, so they're capable of predicting behavior and responding to social dynamics. But they also have zero education. They're basic as hell, and that means they're only going to respond to the most primitive form of communication, which revolve around power hierarchies. Melanie instinctively realized that establishing dominance would be the most effective way to handle them, but she didn't realize that there was an even better way to take advantage of this dynamic. Right now, we can see that all the other children are subservient, and the death of their leader creates a power vacuum that will need to be filled. That's why instead of running away, I would have encouraged Melanie to stay behind and become their new leader. These humans rely on the city's resources for survival, and the wild children aren't going anywhere either. They'll keep setting traps around every valuable resource because they look at humans as food, but all this changes if Melanie can control them. If it were me, I would take psychologist B.F. Skinner's model of behaviorism and try to use it to our advantage. In his experiments, he was able to use positive and negative reinforcement so effectively that he could even teach pigeons how to play ping pong. With this in mind, I would use Melanie's new power to unify the entire clan of children and start subjecting them to behavioral conditioning. Earlier, we established that worm farming can supply enough protein to satisfy Melanie's hunger, so we can use this as a reward to put these kids to work and reinforce behavior that benefits us. Now, the biggest threat is actually this massive tree, because as soon as the spores are released, humanity will be doomed. If we can teach primitive children how to climb a fungus tree and pick seeds to destroy them, we might be able to save the entire human race, and that's a lot more rewarding than just sneaking out from a temporary conflict. The children are terrified of Melanie, and the survivors walk away safely from the supermarket. They head back to the research lab, but something's wrong. The front door has been left wide open, and they hurry inside to find out what's happened. But that's when they see the doctor pointing a gun straight at them. The group realizes they can't breathe and suddenly start choking before blacking out. With everyone else unconscious, the woman pumps the air back into the compartment and drags Melanie to the operating table. She disinfects her hand to prepare for the surgery, but suddenly turns around to see the girl glaring at her. Desperate to survive, the doctor tells her she can make a cure and keep the teacher from getting infected, but only if the girl sacrifices her life. Melanie argues she can help protect them, but the woman points out the seeds in the fungus tree are going to bloom. They open up to heat, and all it would take is a single wildfire to spread the infectious spores, killing every last human on the planet. Convinced, Melanie decides to help make the cure, but before she gets on the operating table, the girl asks the doctor if she thinks her body is still being controlled by the fungus. Considering her question, the woman answers that she's not. She's a living person, and this was the doctor's biggest mistake. Changing her mind, the girl walks away, grabbing a box of matches before leaving the lab. The doctor tries to chase after her, but she's too weak from her wound and can't catch up. That's when she realizes the feral children have surrounded her, and there's nothing she can do to stop them from eating her alive. Melanie goes back to the giant tree covering the BT tower and lights a match, setting the vines on fire. The fungus quickly burns up and dooms the world as the seeds burst open, releasing the spores. Walking back to the lab, she sees the sergeant in the street and realizes he came looking for her. The girl apologizes to him, explaining that everyone on Earth will now be infected, and the man begs her to finish him before he turns into a zombie. Taking his pistol, Melanie shows him the way out and says her goodbyes to one of the last humans on the planet. Back at the research lab, the teacher has woken up and walks through the door, approaching the hermetic seal to discover that the spores have already begun to spread. The world is now officially over, and the teacher is shocked. But seeing Melanie outside, she realizes there's still hope. Days later, the woman prepares her research lab for morning lessons as she greets her new students, and they all sit down, bummed that they still have to go to school.
But what do you think? How would you beat the girl with all the gifts? Let me know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos like this. Until next time, have a damn good day.